In 1987, the writer John le Carré went to Russia for the first time. Although much of his spy fiction had drawn its inspiration from the period of the Cold War, he had never been allowed into the Soviet Union. And novels such as Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, and Smiler's People couldn't be published there. In the climate of perestroika, things changed.
I had difficulty getting there first. My correspondence with the Soviet embassy was one-sided. They didn't reply. And all of a sudden, the obstacles fell away. I, to their surprise, did not say I wanted to see the refuseniks and the dissidents and so on. What I felt I would do was stay with the system. I wanted to stay exactly with the kind of people they wanted to give me, with the grey men, with the officials, with the kind of kosher, presentable people, because I was certain from very, very early on in my stay that what really mattered was how the system itself was going to change. That one convert within the system at this moment in history was going to be worth 1,000 dissidents.
That first visit provided le Carré with the raw material for his novel, The Russia House, which became a #1 bestseller throughout the world. Set in the first years of glasnost, The Russia House set out to capture that moment when the Cold War seemed to be ending.
The perfect Moscow morning. He turned his mind outward and let the city drown his fears with its conflicting smells and voices. The stink of Russian petrol, tobacco and cheap scent, and river water. Hello. 2 more days here, I shan't know I'm smelling you. The sporadic cavalry charges of the commuter cars. Hello. The belching brown lorries thundering through the potholes in pursuit. The eerie emptiness between. The limousines with their blackened windows. The unmarked buildings splitting before their time. Are you a block of offices, a barracks, or a school? The dough-faced boys smoking in their parked cars, waiting. By contrast with his determinedly contented mood, the early food queues had a restless and unsettled look. The grim-suited labor heroes and war veterans had an air of being late for wherever they were marching. Even their sloth seemed to have an air of protest. In the new climate, doing nothing was itself an act of opposition. Because by doing nothing, we can change nothing. And by changing nothing, we hang on to what we understand, even if it is the bars of our jail.
I felt that if I took that blink of a star in Soviet history in the spring and autumn of 1987, nothing could go wrong with my researches and my perception of the voices and the smells and the sounds around me. I felt that if Gorbachev got a bad bullet or perestroika did turn out to be a trick or a game or disinformation or simply a failure, which was what many people in the West believed or hoped it was, then I would have my book and I would have those impressions and those characters and that experience.
You remember the famous sentence by Oscar Wilde when he said, I finished the novel and now it starts its own life. I don't know what the whole thing is about. And maybe the same with Russia House. It is a metaphor of our life from a definite period of time perceived through the eyes of a spy novel.
The publication of The Russia House seemed to coincide with a moment in history when everything was possible. It was seen as an anti-spy novel both in the West and in the Soviet Union. It was in Hollywood where the Cold War had inspired a whole genre of big box office movies, that the book was initially given a hard time.
Hollywood responded initially when we submitted the book with exactly the same kind of attitudes which are described in the book. They said, what's it about? I mean, where's the baddie? And they turned their back on it, individually and collectively. We were then in the peculiar position. We had Stoppard, who was already writing the script, Skepsy, who was determined to make it. I was determined to go with Skepsy. I'd seen Cry in the Dark. I thought it was wonderful. And then Connery came in and Pfeiffer came in and so on. And we had the package that Hollywood dreams of.
When the Western feature film crew finally arrived in Moscow, it seemed one more tribute to the power of glasnost. And Western imagination finally had to confront the reality of life in the Soviet Union.
John le Carré always wanted a good film done of his work. And between us, we decided that we were going to make a particular film and that we were all heading in the same direction. And, you know, that's the film that looks at glasnost and is about the folly of spying in this day and age, at least in perpetuating the Cold War, told through a love story and through the rehabilitation of a man. I felt very strongly, as did everyone else involved, that we had to do this now, because nobody knew what was going to happen. So we had to do it fast. And as it's turned out, it's changing so radically right throughout the Eastern Bloc. I mean, in ways and at such a rate that none of us could possibly have conceived of that. Think you're sort of intelligent and have a liberal approach and an open mind, and you go somewhere and you suddenly realize when you're there just how many misconceptions you've had about something because of the indoctrination you've had.
Make the Americans, or maybe all the world, to know what is going on here, how we live here. And I feel never shy when we show dark sides of our life. There are other things of which I feel shy before the English people, but not of the thing that we show real life here. It's very good to my mind.
I'd like people to get a shock at what they think they knew about Russia and Russians and how different it is from that. I mean, they're wonderful people and suffering hardships that we can't even conceive of. And you realize that it's governments and theories and things that perpetuate the Cold War, not the people or the ordinary person.
If you love peace, please, take this to England to Mr. Scott Blair. It is a gift of trust.
It is better that you smile.
Excuse me?
Smile. This is Anglo-Soviet cultural exchange. We smile, we exchange culture. Looking scared is something different. We've got it in there, have we?
It is very dangerous for you. You must believe in what you're doing.
Smile. We smile, we kiss, formal Russian kiss. That's right. Now we've done it. You have brought me an official farewell gift from...
The Russia House begins when Katya, an ordinary Russian woman, is asked to hand secrets to an unsuspecting British publisher, Barley Scott Blair. But she is forced to leave them with one of his colleagues, and inevitably, the information falls into the hands of the secret services.
Thank you.
You can't think of any reason why a Russian book editor called Katya Oliver should risk her neck to send you a manuscript? Barley?
Who said risk her neck?
I did.
Must be quite a book.
When you're telling a story like this, you do have to set it in the context that people are familiar with. So I gave Barley, and I gave the initial impulse to the story, all, I hope, the energy of the Cold War days. Secrets are coming out of Russia. Find the man, send him in, get more secrets out. So it began. And then I moved him into the 90s by showing him the new world and making him the man of the future.
It's certainly not like the kind of character one would associate with being a spy certainly in the Bond films. It's very interesting. There's a couple of speeches which he makes when he says that we have to all betray our countries if there is to be hope. Yeah? Pretty kind of strong stuff in the circumstances, you know, patriotism.
We thought we could bankrupt you people by raising the stakes in the arms race. Gambling with the fate of the human race.
Barley, you won your gamble. Nuclear peace for 40 years.
Oh, rubbish. What peace? Ask the Czechs, the Vietnamese, the Koreans. Ask the Afghans. Now, if there is to be hope, we must all betray our country. We have to save each other, because all victims are equal, and none is more equal than others. It's everyone's duty to start the avalanche.
A heroic thought, Barley.
Listen, nowadays you have to think like a hero, just to behave like a merely decent human being.
There is, if you look at the Russia House, no villain. And the villain is a collective one called the Grey Men. The villain is perhaps the leftover postures and attitudes of the Cold War, which are sustained by people who have a vested interest in sustaining them.
Did you spot our watches?
The tramp raiding the dustbin, the woman with the white shoes, and of course the man with the tracksuit.
You scored nil out of a possible 12. The lesson is, you'll never know who they are. If you need to write something down, use a single sheet of paper on a hard surface that leaves no impression. How many such surfaces can you see in this room?
Including the windowsill? 4.
7. This is often easiest. Then wipe it clean, rubbing hard. The issue is why. That's what you're looking for all the time. We trust the motive, we trust the man, and we can trust the material. Why did Dante pick on Katya? Why does he put her life at risk? Why does she let him?
I like Barley because he's not a spy. He's you and me. He's an ordinary person. You know, he probably always wanted to do something for the world, but he didn't really know how, and he didn't think it would serve any purpose, ultimately. And then somebody comes along and gives him the chance, gives him the training, and he is able to serve the world, but not in the way you quite expect, in his way. So he keeps his integrity, he keeps his individuality, and while he's involved in something that he has a great disrespect for, he finds a way of using it for the good of the world. And that's the kind of spy I like.
It is for that commitment to the individual that Le Carré is admired in Russia. And that is also the reason that until recently, his books were banned there. The Lenin State Library for Foreign Literature is the official keeper of the English editions of Le Carré's books. But while a limited number of people had access to them there, his many admirers were circulating copies on the black market.
Well, I suppose he upset our bureaucrats. He upset our literary bureaucrats. He upset some of our party leaders. He He was against any kind of persecution of an individual, which was the most important thing, because to my mind, Le Carré, and it's on my part, is a great compliment. He is a great individualist, and he believes in the individual. He does not believe in society.
In the thawing climate of the 80s, leading magazines published translations of Le Carré's novels. And in 1990, the publication of the Russia House in the Soviet Union meant the spy writer finally came in from the cold.
Le Carré is very courageous because, in my opinion, not one good Russian writer has yet dared to write about perestroika and glasnost. One really has to be a foreigner to take the plunge into this cold water and swim across this long pool. So, of course, I appreciate his book for its boldness. And whether or not it is successful in its description, boldness and risk are always qualities to be admired in a writer.
John Le Carré seems to me to write really acute and important political fiction. Fortunately, we have come in this country, in our society, to the point when we have no fears about something which irritates our purified picture of our own life. We are accustomed to the self-criticism, and we would like to know how the people see us, the people abroad.
It's quite difficult to assess, and you're a bit put off by the lack of eye contact and the apparent sort of indifference, and because it could well be the concern not to make the mistake of who do you trust and denunciation and all that is frightening. It's a fear too, and it's been very much instilled in them. You get in an elevator and you look and you say good morning, and they don't look at you, they look at the floor. And yet when you do go into their homes or meet them, as I've met quite a lot of them now, you realize just how they're a terrific spirit, sense of humor, very nice openness, and like in all conditions, whatever, the human tries to make the best of it. They all like to talk. That's their best times, talking, drinking, and eating when they've got it, and that's very much a ritual.
At first, they seem kind of cold and expressionless, especially, I think, if you just walked around and observed them. But it's fascinating because you'll be sitting there talking to someone about this country and what's going on and experiences they've had, and all of a sudden they'll lead into some very tragic story, and the expression and the tone of their voice doesn't change, and all of a sudden tears will just roll down their face. And there's no shame, and there's no embarrassment, and it's so kind of pure, and it's mesmerizing.
Well, they say in the West that we Russians have something mystic in our mystery in our souls. And I told you that Moscow is a mess, architectural mess, and, well, a mess, you know. And as Moscow represents Russian soul, a Russian mysterious soul. So I think that the mystery is how we can survive in such a mess. That is our mystery.
Russia, we wanted to be very much in the streets to show people as much of Russia as we possibly could. Moscow and Leningrad are so large, on such a large scale, that even with the widest lens, and we are doing CinemaScope, you can't get it in. You just can't. It's, I haven't seen a scale like it before, ever. And I normally don't like to pan or, you know, do unnecessary tracks around. So we tried to use the people in the drama to carry us around, so that while you're watching the drama, you don't realize, but you're doing a 360 degree, and subconsciously you sort of go, well, this is an enormous place. Sometimes this extraordinary thing happens. It's almost like you're a third person or another party who's in there eavesdropping. You constantly have this feeling that the people you've just been involved with are being observed from all different points of view, not necessarily the ones that you expect.
To a great extent, we all of us live in a secret condition. We all of us watch the movements of power around us. And by the time you get to the Soviet Union, this is the very stuff of life. And the Russians understand about conspiracy. They believe in it. They're great chess players. And they also understand about repression.
When I started reading the novel, and frankly speaking, I was a bit afraid when I opened the book, because, you know, it's a dangerous thing for a foreign writer to write about something very, very distant from him. It's Russia, and being in Russia, living in Russia, it's not living in some other country, it's living in some other world. What was very good of Le Carré, he perceived, just being in our city, that the percentage of fear is so great that everything is full of it.
We have, over the decades, become accustomed to living in this atmosphere of repression, denial of freedom, the fear of facing the gravest consequences without having done anything to deserve them. I think the way Le Carré picks up on this atmosphere of fear is natural and realistic. Because even those of us who didn't live under Stalin, who didn't go through the fears of those nighttime arrests or the horror of wrongful imprisonment and even death, have inherited this fear genetically, and it affects all our lives.
They live with surveillance, with mutual informing, with little deals with the little KGB guy around the corner. All the time. That's how they've grown up. On top of that, even the material things of life obtained by clandestine means. you're on telephone, and who has cabbages today, and who has chickens today. All of that is the network. Telephone calls in Moscow within the city are free, and people talk all the time to one another. And the stuff is about where you can get a face towel, where you can get a piece of soap, where you can get chicken, how you do the deals, the trading, the barter.
Today there is a shipment of shoes with perestroika that is even less available than before.
No. Really? I thought things were improving.
Everything is corrupt and incompetent. Perhaps different people are now stealing, I don't know.
Keep your voice down now.
Complaining is our new human right. Glasnost gives everyone the right to complain and accuse, but it doesn't make more shoes.
I think that's one of the most difficult things here. It's not necessarily that people don't have hope, but it's difficult to keep your energy and not feel like you just want to give up.
Le Carré didn't mean to portray a heroic woman, because it's not his cup of tea. His Katya is not a heroine, and I'm very happy that she is not. She's a human being, but I've never met any hero in Le Carré's fiction. He's against heroes, and I think that he's right being against heroes. What is authentic about her psychology is that she is to cope with her inner structure, the one she just got from her childhood. And what she got from her childhood, everything that we get from our childhood, that's somewhere very deep in your soul. A small grain, but still a grain of fear, can exist. With us, we're so, and Le Carré's Katya, we are so involved in politics, whether we want it or not. We can't help being involved. And of course, it affects our psychology. It affects everything in our life.
The tower blocks glowered above them, but in the streets there was already the menacing atmosphere of curfew. Scents of autumn filled the damp night air. Katya turned left, but still nothing passed them. She wasn't speaking, so he wasn't either. He wondered how they learned it, where it is safe to speak, where it isn't. At school? From older girls as they grew up? Or was it your earnest little lecture from the family doctor somewhere around the second year of puberty? It's time you learned that cars and walls have ears, just like people.
In my opinion, Le Carré has not really appreciated the nature of the Russian woman in this novel. Yet he has dared to make her his heroine. So for the Russian reader, everything associated with her is simply Western consciousness playing with its own image of the Russian woman.
Кто я? Ну, как вы помните, книжки.
Who am I? As you remember, in the book The Russia House, the main character is a Russian woman called Katya, who has 2 children, speaks English, lives in the writer's village Peredelkino, and works in publishing.
Которая имеет дело с книжками.
It isn't me, of course. Although I'm also called Katya,
Я тоже говорю по-английски.
also speak English, also work in publishing, also have 2 children, and also live in Переделкино. I wondered if I could do what she did, and I think not. But then, I'm not a spy like her, and I think if I knew I was passing on war secrets, I wouldn't be able to do it. And Katya, of course, really ran great risks. Perhaps there are such people. There are all kinds of people. And why shouldn't Katya be the kind of person who hands over these notebooks? So perhaps she does exist. And then I'm completely in love with the main hero, Bali. I think he's my man.
Are you coming back to Moscow?
No, not this time. I have to fly straight back to school.
School?
Work, England. It's a stupid expression of mine. I hope I didn't bore you last night.
You did not bore me.
No. Perhaps next time. I'll make a special journey just to talk about myself.
I wish you a good journey, Bali.
I'll miss you.
At first, when I began to read The Russia House, he annoyed me terribly. I was horrified by him, and I couldn't understand why. And then, when I'd read it all, I realized that it was because he's very free. This isn't the dissident word in phrases such as "I want freedom" or something. He is free with a capital F. It's in his genes. He was born with it. Whereas I am completely inhibited.
Come on now, stand by to shoot. And roll, please. Running. Action.
No more. Take. No more.
Bali was being conditioned, trained to behave like an agent of the Cold War. And what Bali found around him was a kind of void, a new state of flux, where the old arguments simply rang no bells for him. He felt, in a sense, that he had been betrayed, I think, by being driven into this situation.
Choose someone else.
We didn't choose you. Dante did.
Because I wasn't a spy.
We're not asking you to build the beastly rockets or push the button, only to help improve our knowledge of the enemy. And if the enemy turns out to be a friend, where's the harm?
In the Russia House, where espionage plays its part, is in a quite different sphere. I think it tests the sort of 1920s anxiety about the rivalry between loyalty to oneself and loyalty to the country or the institutions one is serving. At what point can it be said that the institution has so run out of control, or is itself being so deceitful, that individual values are the ones that really matter and the ones that must override the seeming duty?
The villain is the lack of understanding from both sides and the misreading of each other's information and what the signals are, and just how strong disinformation is.
You're in business.
Are you saying that he's still in the flat?
You see what I see?
Why did Barney go in? Why shouldn't he go in?
Or all you have to do is just find time and the place.
Yeah, I think the villains in the film are the Western Secret Service groups. And, well, I always do, I think, but anyway. Because they should be about peace and making it a better world, not about perpetuating the wars. And they're not.
I thought we were all supposed to be chums together now.
Oh, my dear Lord.
Because this year it suits them to roll over on their backs and play nice doggy. Because this year they're on the floor anyway, you ninny. All the more reason to spy the living daylights out of them. Kick them in the balls every time they get to their knees.
Well, that's where I disagree. I'll back my Russia against yours anytime. I'm sorry, Ned. No go.
The irony is that by taking him, training him, they revived his intellectual resources. In the making of the man, they actually made a man they could no longer use. They made a man who was able to criticize them and act critically against them.
Ultimately, it's about one man's life and whether he'll find the courage to rehabilitate himself and do the right thing. Then, you know, it's about the woman who gave him that courage, through her not being a passionate idealist or a political animal, but just being someone who finally thought something had to be done, and if it meant sacrifices, that she could do something.
You have bewitched my family. My children think all you British are now Santa Claus in beautiful tweed clothes.
There's no Santa Claus. Nobody is what he seems, except you.
Why do you want to take away my rights? Go and sit down. I hope you are not being frivolous, Polly. My life now only has room for truth. What are you doing?
It is a brave and difficult thing to act as an individual in a society like ours, which has been ideologically so collectivized. 2 legs good, 4 legs bad. We love, in our romanticism, the brave individuals. Our religion, our national religion, is based upon the courage of one man acting against the establishment. But such is the weight of information and disinformation and obligation upon us, that it requires a huge act of courage to get up and speak your mind and act in accordance with what you believe. And my work really does pirouette around that moral or political center.
Just the construction of a spy novel is an excellent thing, because you can put anything, everything into it. Just take the story of Jesus Christ and Judas, and it'll be a kind of spy novel as well. And that is why it is a metaphor of our life from a definite period of time that can be covered, that can be perceived through the eyes of a spy novel.
Le Carré's book cannot change the world, nor can any book. This is the great illusion of writers who think something can change the world. I'm speaking here about art, literature. When Le Carré started to write about Russia, he fell into the Russian literary tradition, which believes very insistently that literature can change something. When he wrote The Russia House, Le Carré, to a certain extent, became a Russian writer for a moment.
Take 3, Mark.
Action.
I feel that the perestroika, the whole revolution, if you will, counter-revolution in Russia, presents us with a major identity problem too. We've lived for a long time in this convenient condition of aggression. It's dignified our politicians to give them this massive, monolithic enemy, as it appeared. And now that enemy is gone. And now we have to accept that enormous sacrifices may be necessary to buy for other people the freedom we promised them.
We have to save each other, because all victims are equal, and none is more equal than others. It's everyone's duty to start the avalanche.
A heroic thought, Father.
Listen, nowadays you have to think like a hero, just to behave like a merely decent human being.
Come on. Thank you, love.
Can I have one now, eh?
Where is it? On the other side of the bar.
Ah, other side of the bus. See that? Morning, Kev.
Location today is the airport. The best location of the film. It's one set, interior airplane. It's a 3-hour shot back to Heathrow Airport. Then an early wrap and home.
Yeah. And have a very safe journey.
Thank you. I'll do everything for them tonight.
Good. Take care. Good luck back at university.
Я думаю, что
I think that although perestroika is in full swing here now, and at last we have begun to breathe the air of freedom, because of the problems we have inherited from those terrible and difficult times, we cannot yet pull ourselves together and escape from our past.
и избавимся от генов.
Good morning, guys.
No, I'm staying with the customs and the buses.
See you again. Free lucky.
My love is with you.
I think we won't know how to market this picture until it's finished and we know what the world political scene is, what's happening with all of the changes that are taking place now. I think it'll be so timely in an odd kind of way. It'll just take a slice of time just when it was all beginning and give people a chance to step back and look at it.
Real spy story draws on some kind of notion of duty, on the tension between the individual and society. And for as long as nation-states compete, and for as long as statesmen and stateswomen don't always tell the truth, for as long as people intrigue and are greedy, and for as long as the instinct for subversion and power prevails in politics, which is actually forever. The spy story will go on doing its job. It must, of course, adjust to new circumstances. It flourished in the Cold War because that was the genre of the world in which we lived. The spy story was called a genre novel, but we lived in a genre period, and it was called the Cold War.
So is it a beginning or ending? I asked. He shrugged. When did it ever end? Turn on your television set, what do you see? The leaders of both sides hugging each other, tears in their eyes, looking more like each other every day. Hooray, it's all over. Bollocks. Listen to the insiders, and you realize the picture hasn't altered a brushstroke. And if I turn my television set off, what will I see then? You'll see us, hiding behind our grey screens, telling each other we keep the peace.
Next week,